State Research and Extension for answering our Gardening 911 questions. Something else that has come up is we were talking about how we did spend not a lot of money, but some money on the fencing, the lumber, and the soil for our raised garden bed. And so we're wondering is that after we harvest, will we harvest enough to offset the funds that we put into it?
That's a really great question. One of the reasons that people start home gardening is because they really think that it can decrease their food costs. A challenge with knowing whether or not it does is that, first of all, we have to keep a good track of what we're actually spending, and then we also have to keep track of what we're growing and getting out of the garden and give that a monetary value as well. So if we think about the costs, what we know is from peer-reviewed research is that the average cost in the growing season is about $260. And when we think about costs, that obviously includes seeds, plants, can include soil, compost, mulch. If you need tools, it might include the tools. There's a pretty big range, though, of what people spend. And part of that is, first of all, because of the different studies included different types of costs, but then also gardeners, depending if they're new or they're more experienced, might have more costs than others. So then when we think about the monetary benefit of actually gardening, there's a couple of challenges there as well. First of all, how are we going to measure the yield of our garden? And one way, and the most direct way, and probably the way that works for most of us best, is to actually weigh on a scale everything that we take out of the garden. Another way is to estimate using typical agricultural yield data. Once we know how much we've grown, then we have to decide what price we're going to use as the value of that produce. And then it's pretty straight calculation of multiplying the weight by the price to figure out how much we've saved. Again, there's a very wide range in the peer-reviewed literature about how much people actually do produce in their gardens, the dollar amount. And it can be anywhere from about $150 or so to over $1,000 if you don't count labor. If you include labor, the range is somewhere negative, meaning you didn't make anything, to about $555 to the plus. The wide range depends on so many factors. First of all, like where's the location of the garden, the skill of the gardener, what crops you decide to grow, and local conditions. In a rainy year or a dry year, your yields may be dramatically different than another year. Before we leave this topic, it's good to think about what are the most valuable, so to speak, products that you might grow in your garden. And one of the top ones is typically tomatoes and other very high value produce that you might grow tend to be leafy green vegetables, peas, strawberries, and eggplant.
And even if we don't cover the monetary and time investment in the garden, there are other benefits to home gardening, right?
Oh yes, there are many benefits to growing a garden that aren't necessarily monetary. For example, when you grow your own food, you might feel a greater connection to that food. Also, during the growing season, it's likely that we have access and eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. And finally, who doesn't know the joy of homegrown produce that's been preserved to eat during the dark months of the wintertime? As gardeners, we feel these additional benefits, and researchers have confirmed them, that gardening can reduce stress, increase our mental health, and also increase concentration and memory.
So I have my garden planted, and that's awesome, but it is taking its time growing. So in the meantime, where could I go to find some locally grown food, and also for food that I didn't plant in my garden?
Great question. At some point, all of us will hit a limit on how much we can grow ourselves. And also, as I mentioned earlier, yields can vary dramatically, and we might not be able to grow enough of something that we need ourselves anyway. Before we talk about where to find locally grown food, take a few minutes and think about what locally grown means to you. There are no legal or agreed upon definitions, so that means that each of us can decide for ourselves what our own definition of locally grown is. Perhaps it means to you that it's food grown within your county, or maybe it means food grown within a certain number of miles within your home. Or maybe it means food grown within the state of Kansas. At this time of year, probably the most convenient place to find locally grown foods is our local farmers markets. If you're not sure where to find your farmers market or what days, go to the From the Land of Kansas Farmers Market directory. Another source of locally grown food is farm stands, U-Pick farms, or directly from farmers and growers. Information about these opportunities is found on Facebook through the Shop Kansas Farms page. Don't assume that your local grocery store or specialty store doesn't carry locally grown food. If you're not sure, check the signage, read the labels, or simply ask an employee. Finally, we all know stories of gardeners who have way too much zucchini and they're not sure what to do with it. If you've grown more of a certain vegetable than you can use or want to preserve, talk to your friends and neighbors. Perhaps they have fruits and vegetables that they're not going to use, and you can either do a trade or maybe they'll just give it to you. Enjoy the food that you grow, and don't hesitate to be in touch with questions, or if you need resources, let us know.